spaces that can make you want to make art and feel like a bit in the box. I'm Lo, the Wheelie Cleric, and today's guest is someone who brings a deep thought, deep heart, and a real sense of history and cultural context into the room. I'm talking about my friend Bard at Bard of the Mad Realm. Bard is a historian, an anthropologist, a trans femme non-binary artist, and a current student of art as well. She is someone in the process of rethinking, rebuilding, and reimagining what art and expression can be. Talking to them feels like stepping into the most accepting but also challenging classroom you can go into, that you just want to keep talking and delving into ideas all day. And there is reflection and endless questioning and so much that we talk about, and honestly we need more spaces like this to talk about all of our deep thoughts about gender and art. So a lot of our podcast is not just about art. A lot of this podcast is not just about wargaming, but more so about art and how traditional art can affect our more niche hobbies and interests that we have. And of course, how gender relates into that. So the idea of community and creating spaces is having new identities and expressions that can take root. And that's where I want to start today. We talk a lot about art, identity, and gender. We're not just talking about self-expression, we're talking about building third spaces, which is a large theme of this podcast and as well as my next podcast episode. Spaces that aren't home, aren't work, and aren't the official institutions that define us. Spaces where we can be complicated, be creative, and more fully ourselves. So the scholar Simone P. Fullagar wrote in 2019 about how third spaces work, especially from a feminist lens for marginalized groups specifically. She argues that third spaces are crucial for everyday survival because they allow people to experiment with identity outside of the rigid expectations of society and without the draining expectations of keeping things together at home, as well as your actual labor in a workday. There are places that you don't have to perform for these kind of institutions. You don't have to conform to the scripts that family or school write for you. You can just be. And you can also be in your gender and feel more out there. And that's something I really did appreciate this article writing about. In a lot of ways, Bard's journey through art school and through learning anthropology is about creating and protecting those third spaces and having places where art can be made. We talk a lot about Bard's community online, as well as times that they haven't felt very accepted at their local game store in a different part of rural somewhere Pennsylvania. These are spaces that we create. And I'm not talking about the stores, but places online, places that are our own little spaces where we can be trans and queer and all the beautiful misfit parts of identity, and we don't have to justify them. Art is one of the most powerful ways that we build and make these third spaces. So this brings us to another important idea, how gender shapes not just who makes art, but what art is considered worth making. There is a powerful study that I mentioned before by Dr. Akademir from 2017 that talks about gender representation in contemporary art and shows us that the official canon of art, the stuff that gets shown in museums, taught in classes, held up as serious art, has historically been dominated by cis male perspectives. Art that came from women, trans people, queer people, anyone else outside the norm was treated as minor, emotional, not real, othered. The result, art isn't a mirror of our world then. It's just another academic place that isn't accessible to those who are gender diverse. When Bard talks about studying history, anthropology, and art, they're engaging in that fight of academia. They're asking whose stories are missing here, and even challenges me on why we seem to notice trans people more than just the overwhelming of cis people in our spaces. And they are someone who has really built a space online, and their name deserves to be in the textbooks just as much as any other historian. So, what happens when we stop waiting for permission and just start making new stories, new art, new ways of being? Talking to Bard reminds me that we can make these things. Our creativity doesn't have to be neutral. It can be political. It can say something. It can be an act of resistance. It's an act of pushing forward, insisting that there are more ways to be human than just the narrow one that we've been handed. So today we are diving into a conversation all about art, gender, resistance, hope, studying things, and being together in spaces, what it means to go back to school as a trans femme artist, and about how to build spaces again that we can grow and shape ourselves in. How painting a miniature or a canvas painting can be a radical way to express yourself. All right, let's get into it. Here's Bard. So this is just because I like to naturally get into it. Because I don't know about you. I'm really weird. I can talk in front of a stage, but I get really nervous when I start recording online.
Same, yeah.
That's been my issue with streaming. Partly busy, partly that.
Yeah, I like to see people and to hear them.
Yeah.
That's why I have a hard time with YouTube. That's why I've changed it from 1 week after Adepticon to 1 month after Adepticon.
Yeah.
I keep fucking stumbling over my lines, and I'm like,
yeah. No, I like in person. I recently joined the improv club, and it's been very fun.
oh my god, it's a queer in an improv club? So stereotypical.
Who would have guessed? I've
Who
never
would've-
done any other theater. None.
You lucky bastard.
I don't follow scripts. I don't memorize things.
You know what? That checks out.
No brain space. So,
Nope. Yep.
my good friend Bard,
My good friend Lil,
at Bard of the Mad Realm,
at lil.willy.clark.
who are you?
I'm doing
what is your
fine.
deal?
What'd you say? Huh?
I said, what is your deal?
My deal is you take France and I take Germany. Alright. Cool.
I don't like this deal. I'd like to renegotiate.
Okay, what do you want?
What do I want? want you to give your goddamn introduction.
Okay, what would you like for the introduction? You're going to have to do a fuck ton of editing. Oh, sorry.
No, you can swear.
Oh, okay, cool.
My professor's amazing. I am very good friends with her son.
Nice. Oh, wow, you fucking Nepo student?
Uh,
Again, so am I. Because, I'm studying at Cedar Crest College, and do you know that Josephine, their mother, is the president of Cedar Crest College?
yeah, what?
So I'm a Nepo student.
That's crazy, actually.
Yeah. We should play Magic the Gathering sometimes again. Anyway,
Oh.
so what do you want for the introduction?
Just give me your name, your pronouns, and like what you do within the wargaming slash hobby community.
Alrighty. So I will give the name that everyone calls me, not my full long name, because Instagram.com hates me and won't allow me to put it. Yeah. It said your name can only be like 50 characters or so. Yeah. Anywho, but so everyone calls me Bard, and I call myself Bard. My pronouns are they, them, and she, her, and I am a kit basher and painter, as well as narrative person in the miniature war game community, and recent YouTuber who is going to focus on artistic endeavors and how you can apply traditional quote-unquote art techniques and history onto miniatures and kit bash little freaks.
That's awesome. You are one of the few people, and I know oil paints has been a trend, but you're one of the few people I've seen apply traditional art in a really interesting way.
Why, thank you. I am going to.
Fascinates me.
Thank you. Something that's spurring me is that I have a very vapid twink of a professor who my friend Ollie and I are slowly starting to break him, because at the beginning of the semester, first semester, so last year, he said that miniatures aren't art, and so we've slowly been breaking him to get out of his high mindset.
That's so funny.
Yes, it is. And also, this is the same guy who, for the one art project that he did, was he made a massive diorama, but also it wasn't a miniature, the whole thing. But rather than get flocking, he cut his own hair and dyed it green. Not because of, artistic intent or something. He just forgot flocking existed, or he doesn't know flocking existed.
That's crazy. Because I will see things in the mini painting community, like Golden Demon, like there is such high artistic integrity that I don't always think is valid or attainable or accessible in so many ways. So it's crazy that that hasn't reached the wider art community.
Yeah, I think also that Golden Demon, I only like it because it is a showcase of miniatures and artistic talent, but I don't like when art is judged. And it is ultimately an art competition, and it has a lot of biases. Like I went to Adepticon this year, which is a massive miniature convention where you can do art and gaming and whatnot. And this is something that somebody that I know from my friendly local game store scene had said, where you can definitely tell what the judges like based upon the similarities between all of the miniatures. And I thought that a mini in a case was from someone of my local community. And so I texted him and said, like, hey, did you put this mini into Golden Demon? And he said, no, I'm not even at Adepticon. I didn't participate. And I was like, oh. And then as the days went on, I saw more and more minis painted in that same style. I was like, all right, this is just pandering. There is no artistic expression. This is just, I want to be cool to the judges, so I'm going to not be expressive with it.
Yeah. So, not in a history sense, but in just a vibes sense, what is Golden Demon, for those who don't know?
Oh, Vibe Sense Golden Demon it's had many things over the years, because Golden Demon is ultimately what Citadel, the company that makes the paints and miniatures for Warhammer 40,000, Warhammer Age of Sigmar, so on and so forth, it was a mascot. On all of Warhammer's early painting stuff, there was a demon painted in yellow, the Golden Demon, as it was. Even today on the Citadel, like, paper palette thing, he's still there. It's evolved into an art competition where the vibes are, I guess you can say, they've sort of taken on the modern influencer feel. It's not what you would expect, a traditional artistic expression and exhibition to be.
Yeah. There's a lot of technical skill.
Yeah.
Course,
people,
that's it.
Yeah. People file through. No one, a select few people do the judging. Nobody gets a chance to present or go through their techniques or say anything. It's just the miniatures are presented. You walk through, and you can definitely tell who are the influencers, because a lot of the aesthetics and vibes are based on their pieces. They're put out first before any other models. And when you watch their YouTube channel or Instagram or Twitter, it's obvious that they're doing it just for the views. And so the whole vibe is, who's the most popular?
Yeah. And I kind of had this thought when I was thinking about content creation and gender within Warhammer, with how a lot of mostly cis men, but like masculine identity within the hobby is around competitiveness. Whether it be in the rules, in the art competitions, within these technical videos, like, what has been your experience with that?
Oh, and note, this is why you should come out to Adepticon next year. I attended the gender minority meetup and met a whole bunch of cool people that I'm now friends with on Instagram.
Talking about that.
Bennett was also talking about, yeah. Like, I met Lila Mave, she is the mini painting witch on YouTube. Yes. Absolutely love her work. She was like the first creator for minis on YouTube who was not a man, who was not a cisgendered masculine man. And now we're good friends, and it's like, oh, this feels weird. Because she's like a really big name in YouTube for mini painters and whatnot. And looking at her videos, rewatching them after having met her and bonded over the movie Tremors, wild experience. It put it into perspective when I would watch all the other YouTubers who were who were men. And it felt very weird, because a lot of it was, oh, there's competition. We are the cool dude, like, they're the cool edgy guys who listen to like Fall Out Boy and Falling in Reverse, or like not new metal, like grindcore metal, like the guys who slick up their hair into spikes, but also like somewhat old. I don't know how to describe it. If I presented a photo to you, you would get it.
I know. Hey, I get it.
Yes. And I'm just doing it for the audience. And then I would look at two hobby YouTubers who are men, and that I am aware of are men. Well, I'm like, I know they're men, but they're the only two that I know have YouTube channels. Which is Trent from Miscast Minis, who is an absolute marvel of a guy, and Niche from Niche Crafts. Those two guys, absolutely love their content. We're now friends from Adepticon and whatnot. And it's like, and a little bit from before. And it's like, wow, you two are the only ones who I feel won't look at me and think, that's, yeah, cool. If I were to ever walk up and be clocky, which is usually how I am, I get clocky with it.
Yeah, and
yeah, they're not competitive.
And it's so funny, like you mentioned, Lila, because I'm thinking of just the other day. I was going through a bunch of videos because I was having kind of a crisis of my own mini painting and feeling like I am nowhere near good enough to like enter anything. And I was watching all these videos and just the tone people were taking that I didn't realize until I stumbled upon one of her videos. Oh, this is a very competitive male environment.
Yeah.
And it's supposed to be fun.
Oh, yeah. Also, like, Brett from Goobertown Hobbies and, you know, they're cool too. Because they take on a very Bob Ross persona.
Yeah, and doing things that aren't within the realm of like professional miniature painting necessarily.
Yeah. Yeah. But as you were saying, sorry for interrupting.
No, I was just going to ask you more about your experiences interacting IRL, whether it's at a local place or a like national, international convention. What has been your experiences interacting between people that are gender diverse versus cis people?
Well, at the convention level, it was you could definitely see all of the gender diverse people. Like they did not hide it, and so it was very cool and whatnot. I felt, there were probably people around who were like, ugh, but no one ever really showed it, and everyone was cool. So it's like, woo! And online too, I only really also just to turn it back, Mike Kitbash Chaos from YouTube, he's a man, he's cool. Anyway, so but on the like Instagrams and whatnot, also fairly cool. But then again, you sort of cultivate that space for yourself.
Yeah.
And when it comes to the local scene, it's I don't know how to put it in concise words. When I and like my partner Josephine, or because we're basically the two most visible queer people there, step in, the people who know and respect it will, gender us correctly and whatnot, and will see us as individuals. There are people who, still need some work. And it's like, all right, come shut up and just respect it, all right? And then there are the people who you go, yeah, okay, I'm not going to interact with them.
Yeah.
But because when you're in that space, on the local scene, at least in my experience, it's like, oh, they're judging you first and not so much the hobby and the art that you're presenting. And it's very hard to actually enjoy what you're doing. Like, you have fun, but at the back of your mind, there's just this pull that drags you back, like that lifts your head up as you go.
Yeah.
Exasperation, because you're being judged and experienced in a completely horrible and wrong way, rather than how everyone else does it, or in my experience, where you are respected for what you put out in terms of the art and the hobby and what you do. People will ask you your opinions. People will, give compliments and will want compliments just as like any other normal person. But then when it comes to the matters of your identity, it's like, you still haven't gone past that barrier.
Yeah.
And it makes every interaction awkward when you remember that. And it's like, I cannot really be myself.
Yeah. And I think I'm lucky to have a very accepting game store, being in a surprising completely rural area, and that's the owners, but
yeah. The
yeah.
owner at the owner at the store is very cool too. Kevin, he runs the Rubicon Hobbies and Games in Quakertown, Pennsylvania. Absolutely love him. And one of the things from when he ran a Warhammer store in Allentown is that he said, I cannot stand any form of xenophobia. I can't stand racism, sexism, homophobia, transphobia, so on and so forth. So he's an ally. But it's just the people who do things that, if you are unaware, won't seem like anything. But if you know, you're like, ah.
Yeah,
All right.
and I think I keep interactions in like two different boxes in my brain because I'm so used to trying to present professionally. And I was talking about this with Bennett. Like, I don't feel like I dress gay enough or queer enough.
Yeah.
And so I keep it in these two different boxes like, oh, these are people who are real and nice and accepting and get it. And then these are the people I have to kind of mask around, and I'm still trying to get out of that, like presenting myself in a more acceptable way.
Mm-hmm. And my question is, what do you define as acceptable within
Exactly.
with
Exactly.
your you know accepting game space?
I think I'm still very used to being someone that is perceived as female, as not knowing as much, as needing help in certain ways.
Yeah.
And I usually say like I'll use any pronouns. I don't care. Um, but I still think whether I was a cis female or not, I want that level of respect and inclusion no matter what. And I shouldn't have to present as confused or quieter. Um, Either way, and I just it's still something I work with every day.
Right.
Um, but yeah, and I kind of wanted to ask you, shifting more to the artistic side of things. Um, how do you, or do you even like put your own viewpoints, your own gender presentation into your art?
Uh, Not yet, because I'm one of the people who builds a whole lot of minis
Yeah.
and crashes them and says, I'm going to paint these, and then automatically goes, I'm going to build another little freak, and then builds many more freaks. And then as soon as I start painting something, I go, I'm going to build many more freaks. So in terms of like mini painting,
Hey,
not
hey,
really.
I said art, and building is an art.
No, yeah, I'm saying that for my art.
Mm-hmm.
I don't really know because I haven't really done a whole lot. And in terms of like building little guys and sculpting, I don't know. I guess I like weird little freaks that have tentacles and teeth and horns everywhere. So I'm like, I
Yeah.
guess that is pretty gender. So you could say that in
Yeah.
my oil paintings and whatnot. Oh yeah, you can definitely tell. But in terms of like minis and whatnot, now I haven't really had the time to figure out the full expression, because you can put something that is of the sculpted form onto a table, but your choice of color, if you do apply it, also matters.
Yeah.
And that is something that, especially for a very representational medium as miniatures and the like, is undeniable. You cannot, you know, sort of take whatever you present and have it exist without the color, because otherwise it is just a sculpture. And what I put into the final piece as it relates to my gender identity, I have ideas because there are the things that make me feel good and make me feel euphoric, but I just can't execute it, not personally in terms of skill or whatnot, but because I haven't had the opportunity to really, hone in.
Yeah.
It's one of those things where when you're queer, you figure out your aesthetics, you figure out what makes you feel good about yourself. But it can be very hard to figure that out and to get all the necessary, environment and pieces to flesh that out. So it's always a constant thing of going in my head of, am I expressing what my gender identity is through my work, or am I expressing what is the accepted and thought of presentation? If that makes sense.
Yeah. Trying to view your identity through a lens of another, and whether that's your like traditional art background, which I am super interested in the subjects of your oil paintings too, if you want to talk about that.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, just how to convey that. Yeah.
Yeah. So with the traditional background in art with oil painting and whatnot, that's when I get very gender with it.
Yeah.
Of all the things that aesthetically make me feel euphoric, I can put onto the canvas in a way that I can't put it onto a miniature, whether I sculpt it myself or if it is presented as it is from a kit that I buy. So for that, you can really get the expression of whom I am as an artist versus what I present in miniature form, which is ultimately not something that I do for myself, but for what I want. So there's a bit of the disconnect between that. Like, if I want to make a painting, I want to make it about an aspect of my gender identity that I cannot put into words or cannot sculpt. But if I'm painting a miniature or sculpting a miniature, I think I want to have a weird floating head because I think it would be cool. And the question
Yeah.
for myself comes by of, am I being genuine as an artist by not putting myself into something, by not putting an aspect of myself into a work?
Yeah. And again, that begs the definition of what is yourself. Is it just a physical aspect, a aspect of what you choose to put in? I don't even, like you said, words are hard.
Yeah.
I mean, do you mind like describing work, traditional work you've done in the past that have conveyed gender?
Oh, that's a very hard thing because once again, haven't really had a whole lot of time
Yeah.
to express the self because a lot of the pieces that I've done have always been for classes.
Yeah.
Recently, though, I've been able to put some self-expression into it as I move into higher levels of class. But a lot of it relates to, I don't know how to put it. I don't know how to put a lot of things, apparently. It is the things that make me relate to the otherness that I've felt. Because in my experience, when you're queer, you latch onto something that makes you feel like the other.
Yeah.
And that is the aesthetic that you go for. It is the thing that is sort of the convection between you transing your gender or whatnot. And for my traditional work, that is very expressive strokes with a brush and the application of paint in a way that other forms cannot give. Or for my sculptural work, very fluid, lanky, bulky, almost distorted forms. Mutations also is a favored word.
Yeah.
And say tell me what that says about my gender, but so yeah, for traditional work, it is taking things, it's taking mediums that you don't have a whole lot of control over, like very thick oil paints or inks, and creating an order from that chaos. That is the ultimate expression in traditional form, for me at least.
Yeah. Or at least for folks who don't know, like, there are so many miniatures out there,
Yes.
a lot of kits out there, but kit bashing is taking either multiple kits or parts of your own that you've sculpted, like, and bringing it all together. And I don't think people realize, and you can explain a bit more than me, like, how limiting a lot of what is sold out there is.
Yeah. Ultimately, you have to work off of the aesthetics of others and what they like, and try and bash it together into something that appeals to you. A lot of the kit bashers that I know on Instagram and have recently met in person have a background in traditional art. A lot of them have art degrees and focus on the same thing that I do, which is sculpting and painting. And so sculpting is taking a whole lot of, the space. It's not so much buying a kit, set of miniatures and putting them all together. It is taking pieces from various ones and then adding it onto something you sculpt.
Yeah.
And I've noticed that is something that a lot of the people who I know that kit bash are queer relate to. Where it is taking something that is out, from the norm, the literal thinking inside the box body, and changing it into a much more appealing form for the self. And as that relates to like gender identity, I've noticed that whenever it comes to the queer people that are kit bashing, they view it and speak about it much in the same way that they view their gender, myself included, where however you perceive yourself within society or perceive your own gender, it speaks to what forms you create. Whether you create hulking forms, skinny forms, slashing, calm, so on and so forth. It's, which once again calls into question of, are you putting yourself into the work, or are you just making something you think looks cool? Because you make something that feels comfortable to you, and when you're sculpting the form that most relates to you. Or unless you're looking at a model that you're sculpting from.
Yeah.
And with
Sorry.
Oh yeah, after you. No, after you.
No, I just think that concept is hard, especially for me. Like, I haven't studied traditional art, and I feel like a lot of people around me don't have that background, and so it's hard to be like, oh, there is meaning behind this, even if I don't intend it, I guess.
Poli-sci major. But yeah, there's the meaning behind it, and then there is the unintentional meaning. There's the meaning that people who are your audience get from it, that they can read and input their own interpretations on. And then there is what you, the artist, are creating consciously and unconsciously. That especially when you're queer and trans in particular, and all those other separate identities that fall under the umbrella, it's very hard to coalesce one singular aesthetic, because you're having to work from all these disparate parts and make it into one thing. Sort of like our gender.
Yeah. Yeah, I think just being able to describe it more as a set of experience as a set of aesthetics.
Right.
Instead of simply like a gender presentation.
Yeah. And that is something where your identity is formulated ultimately of a bunch of aesthetics.
Mm-hmm.
Because how do you identify yourself as nothing more than following this aesthetic over another,
Mm-hmm.
right? So like trans women typically present more femininely, trans men typically present more masculine, and then there are the variations on that. What subculture do you follow? What are your aesthetics that you like from cultures that you're a part of? So on and so forth.
Yeah.
Ultimately, if I may bring in my anthropology degree into this,
yes, please.
Culture is formulated off of aesthetics and what you impose the meaning onto that. Humanity is a symbolic species. No other species of animal has the capability to create in a way that we do. Everything is sentient. It is aware that it is alive, but as far as we are aware, nothing else is sapient. Understanding its position in time, space, and other things positioned in time and space, and of the self. And aesthetics, as it relates to those who diverge from what has been imposed upon them, is the key. You're not thinking about anything else besides aesthetics. Presentation is just an aesthetic of the body, of the voice, of the action. Language is the aesthetic of how you speak, what is invoked when you speak, what images pop into somebody's mind with your voice and your choice of words. It is, and when it relates to art and miniatures, it is the same thing. Like, what do you go for when you create your miniatures? Do you go for the pastels? Do you go for oil paints? Do you create a grim, dark aesthetic? Do you like insects, the knights, random monsters? Like, what's your vibe? And that is solely what you're based off of. And when you're queer, you have the double layers because you have your queer identity, your trans identity, your non-binary identity, so on and so forth, and then the identity of your art, which, because you are an other, will be intrinsically linked, right? No one's going to look at your art and say, that is a separate piece from the artist, because we imbue everything on some level, once again, if we even do, with yourself. So, like, because you are on the spotlight of being another, what does your art say about you more than any other artist?
Bard, I need to put you in a textbook. That was so fucking good. Yeah, and when you get down to it, a miniature is a reflection of something else.
Yeah.
That's the point of it, I guess. And I want to take a wild step back for a minute because I realized, oh, I started this with everything else, but I didn't ask you. How did you get into any of this? Wargaming, miniature painting, all of it.
So I got into it because when I was a wee child, around like, I don't know, 10 or so, I had seen the Warhammer fantasy video game, Warhammer Online, a few of the trailers and whatnot. And I was exploring, like, I would go into Google and type spiky knights, and I saw Chaos Warriors from Warhammer Fantasy, now Warhammer the Old World. Yeah. I was like, ooh, that's cool. And so I kept getting into it, and I looked into it and found Chaos Space Marines, big spiky guys in full plate armor, and it's like, I like knights.
Hell yeah.
And then Hobbytown, USA was nearby, relatively, for the state of Pennsylvania. Mm-hmm. It's like a half an hour drive. And I got the Beasts of Chaos army book for, what was it? Like 6th edition, I think it was. 6th edition Beasts of Chaos, which are these goat people and minotaurs and horrible mutants. And I really stuck with that. And then I started collecting a whole bunch of other stuff like Chaos Space Marines and Warriors of Chaos, big spiky, fully armored people and demons and all of that. I never really played a whole lot of games. I mostly just did it for the artistic aspect of things, because I liked how it looked. I did play quite a bit later on, but it was mainly just because I liked how the models looked.
Yeah, and just for reference, today we're in 10th edition Warhammer.
We're 10th edition Warhammer 40,000, Will, huh?
Oh, wait, you're talking about Old World style.
Yeah, I'm talking about when I was...
Nothing about Old World.
It wasn't the Old World at the time. It was Warhammer Fantasy Battles.
You're old.
Yeah, I am only 24.
You're only 2 years older than me.
But then also, relating back to it, I've played Warhammer and built and painted for quite a bit. So that's how I got into it, because I liked how things looked. I liked big spiky guys in armor because they're just knights but with cool spikes, which look like lizard and dragon stuff. And also I like weird mutants. In the game Magic the Gathering, I play black a lot and anything related to black because it has weird demons and mutants and things with tendrils and teeth. And I like that. I like the weird freaks.
Yeah, and I was thinking about it, and I think a lot of times we want to jump to use the word escapism. But that's not what I think this is. Not for me or you. It is a representation of a expression that is not attainable. You know, they don't have gender confirming surgery to become a big dragon like I want to be.
Those bastards.
And so through artistic expression, that is how we can get the satisfaction of these others, like you put it so perfectly. Right.
Everyone, I like to say escapism is for the people that have a place where they can feel safe. If you do not feel safe, escapism is the reality that you have.
Yeah.
It's, if that's not the most eloquent or understandable way to put it. If you are made into an other, your escapism is the reality that you formulate around yourself to guard against that which is antagonizing you.
Yes.
If you are a part of the hegemony, whatever identity that is, or identities, then escapism merely relates for you being able to experience an othering whilst maintaining your position within that status quo. So escapism is oftentimes applied to tabletop role-playing games, TRPGs, and specifically Dungeons and Dragons, where it was an escapist fantasy, where it was for, when it was conceived, nerds who were cisgendered, heterosexual, white, middle to upper class, still, but were ostracized for being nerdy. they had the escapism of playing their game. They didn't have to face any other pain within their life because of the identities that they had. If they had other marginalized identities, if they weren't cisgendered, if they weren't heterosexual, if they weren't white or middle to upper class, then that would be something that could be, counted as like, oh, this game is not a form of escapism for them. This is the reality they create to survive, right?
Yeah. And I think oftentimes I hear TTRPGs and war games compared, and people being like, well, war games is the obvious less creative choice. And I don't think that's the case in so many ways. I feel like I have so many more outlets when it comes to wargaming.
Yeah.
And maybe that's because there's so many war games out there.
Yeah.
And a lot of awesome models and ways to customize those. And there's so much in D&D and other games too, but I just don't like the comparison, I guess.
Yeah. The comparison ultimately stemmed from the fact that Warhammer, the game that started the fantasy war game craze, was based off of Citadel and Games Workshop that produced stuff for Dungeons and Dragons. Originally, they made stuff for Dungeons and Dragons because TSR, the company that created it and ran D&D, would, give licenses for people to create stuff. And so there's that natural extension. Prior to that, there was historical war games, which could be found all the way back to when Napoleon would do it, and when Austrian and Prussian generals would do Kriegsspiel, literal translation war game, to sort of figure out strategies and whatnot. And so the lack of, like what you're describing, the lack of a expressive form is ultimately because the historical war game, which we now call historics, was once just war games. But then you had Warhammer coming out and all the competitors to Warhammer creating fantasy and sci-fi war games, which have since taken over the market. Historics, which were the once at the top, are now at the bottom. That's a whole other debate as to whether it is dying or not. But it's, it's become a lot more restrictive, which is weird given the fact that the definition of a wargamer is expanding to marginalized identities, such as trans people, or women, or non-binary people, or just anyone, really.
Yeah. And I was talking in past episodes about my gripes with historical wargaming.
Yeah.
And the line that treads, and there's even many programs today in the United States that still use wargaming in military strategy. And I think that's an interesting conversation to talk about the masculine, traditionally, aspects of war, and is that just a vehicle then to deliver creativity to people that wouldn't so feel welcome to do that usually?
Right. And that opens up the female Space Marine debate, which for those unaware, Space Marines in Warhammer 40,000 in the modern lore are all women. Not are all men. Because are all men because the process to create Space Marines only works on men, more specifically like the children that will become child soldiers.
Yeah.
And the reason why is because when Warhammer 40,000, the sci-fi version, came out, there were female Space Marines, but they didn't sell well because of sexism, and the sculpts were just horrible because the sculptors were men and only sculpted men. So there's that. But in the modern age, the female space marine debate is largely done by misogynists and people who are transphobic, whether they are actively either of those or subconsciously. The argument against it is rooted in sexism and transphobia. And when you look at it and you examine why people have a problem with that, it is because war games, historics, and then those who jumped on the fantasy and sci-fi bandwagon were all men. There were a few, marginalized outliers, but is mainly cisgendered, heterosexual, white, middle to upper class men. And Christians too. I should add the identity. Christian people who would jump onto that bandwagon and would infect the space. And now in the climate, historics is where those people typically stay, because it is the thing that they are reserved for. A lot of the historics focus on European or American warfare, which was always dominated by those people who are of a hegemony. There's a war game system called The Men Who Would Be Kings, which is literally you playing as the British colonial army against an opponent who is playing against people resisting colonization. And that is a very well-supported system. Like, the colonial era is second only to World War II. And the reason why it's second is because there are a lot of people who were around for World War II or whose parents were in the Second World War.
Yeah, I've heard the name of that system, but I didn't know anything about it. Oh my gosh. Yeah, it makes me uncomfortable to think about people picking an army and painting and sticking with it and just not knowing any of the history and repercussions around it.
Precisely. So when you examine something like that, putting yourself into that and engrossing into that space and the history of it, you really are locked into a lack of expression. You can't, I also have a history degree, you can't explore various aspects of it with what products are produced. It's not a role-playing game. It is, you build and paint and play with a specific army.
Yeah.
You're not going to say, this is my army of Theban gay men who went to war together because the Greeks were so homo that they believed having gay sex would make you a better fighter. No, you're saying, I am playing a Greek and I'm going to kill the, savage barbarian, the Persian, who is coming to stop us from owning slaves and being pedophiles, right? It's like the historical disconnect, because no one actually gives a shit about the history. They all just give a shit about the gaming aspect and the fact that they don't have to worry about identities that they don't understand and that scare them.
Exactly. I think I want to ask you a question that I asked my girlfriend in the first episode. That she's like, I don't know. Why do so many trans women and trans femmes in particular navigate to not just wargaming but strategy games in general?
I don't know. I'm not really good when it comes to strategy. That's the problem.
Yeah.
It's, I think, the enculturation of being a man, because there are the people who, like myself, were heavily enculturated into what could be perceived as being masculine and being male. But when you came out and figured yourself out, or however you want to put it, you still are into the same stuff. It's just now, for some reason, different because of your identity, right?
Yeah.
It's not, I don't play war games because I like to imagine big armored fighters, clashing steel and dragons sweeping across the sky, because that's pretty badass. No, I like to paint these miniatures because I am somehow a man still, or it is a show of the female mind to really want to hone in on tactics and movement and organizations. Like, no, I just fucking like dragons.
Yeah. And I think,
So
yeah,
after you.
a lot of, I think people make generalizations, but God, I've had so many amazing, like, trans women that have, like, took me in and taught me so much about the hobby and have taken time and play in such a accepting and fun and narrative way that it might as well be a different game. Like, it feels so different and, like we said, non-competitive.
Right. I like to say, because this is something that I studied anthropologically within one of my minors of gender studies and anti-racism, of something is only given importance and analysis if you are putting it through the lens of othering. It something that a professor of mine, when I was studying history and anthropology over at Moravian University, said is, and also is just a common argument, is imagine something, all right? Like, imagine a doctor. Whatever preconceived notion you have of a doctor, you say that out loud, and then the professor like gives a full-on scenario about what's happening, which is ultimately meant to distract you. It's meant to lock you into your preconceived notion. And then at the end, the professor once again asks, or rather adds, something that is supposed to break you from your preconceived notion of what this person, the theoretical doctor, is supposed to look like. If you're like me and you said, okay, why does it matter what they look like? Or because, why should it matter that this doctor is this identity? Or you ask the question that I and a few others asked, which was, why, where are we? What is, why are you asking me this? And what, anybody can be anything. So, theoretically, there are, of course, other factors that society imposes upon others. But it's like, hey, fucking, anybody can be anything. So it's that exercise that really puts you into the mindset of the only reason why you are placing so much attention onto this one thing, like in your context, why so many trans women are into strategy games, is because they're trans. If they were men, you wouldn't give a fuck. Because men are just into strategy games. Men played, Halo and all that shit and historical war games and whatnot. But because it is an othering and you don't understand their perspective, you're asking them why they engage in something that you have a related introspection and connection with to try and understand them. Rather than asking their lived experience, you are trying to go through an avenue that you can relate to, which is not how you connect to people. The subject in question is just a bridge to start interacting with someone to get to know them on the personal level. Yeah. So it's like, also people are like, oh, you must really be a woman because you like art. And it's like, well, I mean, like, I like art regardless of my identity because my mom just encouraged my artistic ability and I love her and she loves me. And she also did art when she was a child. So, like, that encouragement, regardless of whatever, made me be an artist.
But it's like, I know so many women that hate painting minis.
Yeah.
Yeah. You have given me so much good stuff.
I'm sorry for all the rambling and whatnot.
No. It is incredible. If there is anything else you want to add, that you want to end off with, that you want to let people know?
Just looking at the questions that you told me to sort of general topics.
These are just some ideas.
Yeah, like the binary systems, good/evil or/chaos reinforcing systems. How does this affect gender acceptance by diversity, etc.? You can definitely tell also for the marginalization that there is a disconnect between people because big and bulky is perceived as evil unless there is a cross or holy symbol on a person, then they are a paladin. Versus like live and very live is sneaky and evil and like backstabby. Versus like a middling build is, the good guy. It's the anti-hero who's going to ultimately do something good. And it is those ways of perceiving a body and the aesthetics that are influenced from the real world that in stuff like wargaming, fantasy wargaming, I should say, where you do not have the real world to call on your bullshit and say you're being fucking racist or you're being a sexist, you dumb shit. You can impose things and say, oh, this is evil. I like to think back to how orcs are put in fantasy. Because originally Tolkien, who had created orcs, described them in a way that so like this is one of the things where it goes back and forth because Tolkien enthusiasts on the left side like me or on the right side of politics and those in the middle always have a big debate on because there's the consensus that either A, Tolkien was a man of his time and did flawed shit, or B, Tolkien is a horrible person or champion of the master race, even though Tolkien hates Nazis because he likes humans in all of their forms in his writings, his personal writings, I should say. But the orcs were described utilizing a word that is a slur against people with downs and against the Mongols. Because that was the only word that he could utilize to describe their phenotype. And in the context of it, it was because orcs are always squinting because they can't stand the sun. And also he described orcs as being sometimes dark, mostly gray, but also pale. Mostly gray, actually. Some are green. It's a whole thing. But there are aspects of it that were based on his flawed, very racist culture, that being England, that in his own personal writings, he would express regret for some. Others, he wouldn't express regret on because he didn't even really think, oh, this is pretty fucked up. One of the things that he called the author, Frank Herbert, of Dune out on is the white savior narrative. where this literal white guy is going to a planet filled with a bunch of, West Asian, like Jewish and Arab peoples with influence from indigenous Northwestern Native Americans, and being the ruler and leading them onto a jihad. Tolkien said, no, shut up, you postmodernist bastard. But Tolkien also had stuff where men of the South were seen by the people of the West as all evil, even though there are passages where one of the champions, Faramir of the West, says a whole bunch of stuff, and Samwise, who would be conservative, who comes from a small village where no one ventures outside, asks the question, what drives people to war? What drives them to evil? Is this person even evil? What did he have a family? Was he loved? Were they threatened? What's his deal? Right? And those are things that fantasy world builders like at Warhammer and other miniature makers and role-playing game makers would forget. There was no nuance to orcs. Half-orcs in the first edition of Dungeons and Dragons were literally described as, the result of rape and incest. So, not a good look.
No.
And orcs would later on, when people were trying to make them better, quote unquote, after they had taken black and African aesthetics and, even some Polynesian aesthetics at times, then became good and spiritual. And by spiritual, they mean taking indigenous American aesthetics and beliefs and applying that onto orcs, who were still these big, brutish idiots. And that the smart ones who had empathy and sympathy were raised by humans, white humans. So that the aesthetics of culture, for better and for worse, usually for the worse, don't allow for diversity in the body and of the voice of the spirit to exist, because you're already lumping them into this preconceived notion. And it's not a good look, sweaty. Dungeons & Dragons recently, in their 5.5 update, took away the powerful build ability from orcs. And there was a lot of backlash from that, because people said, orcs are supposed to be big and brutish and strong. But then the writers at Wizards of the Coast, the people who make Dungeons & Dragons, then said, well, orcs are sapient. They are a species all their own. It's not like the Warhammer orcs, which are mushrooms that are literally made for war. So to always remember, like, hey, anybody can be anything. And I think that notion of people being able to express themselves on their own, or being free to express themselves with whatever they have going on, is something that causes a lot of friction, because no one who is comfortable in their high position in the status quo wants to relinquish that. So for people who are queer, trans, non-binary, so on and so forth, that is the ultimate height of that. Because it's somebody taking their form and changing it into something that doesn't fit the traditional hegemonic purview.
Yeah, and that's exactly the reason that I wanted to do this project, is because I saw the transformative value of war games and of the art of mini painting all around me, and so many people in academia where I've tried to do projects on it before didn't see that. And so I'm really happy to have the opportunity to talk to people like you, and so many of our good friends.
I know. I have a feeling I know who they are.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yep. And it. Yeah.
This project will, after the semester, will get a bit more free form too.
Yeah.
And I'd love to have you back on.
I would love, and also have more coherent statements for you, so that you don't have hell editing.
Oh no, it'll be fine. I've kind of gone into a meditative state editing.
I see.
It's fun. Well,
I'm going to eat your skull.
I'd like to see you try.
I'll suck it up like a noodle.
I have a comical bite out of me.
Yes.
Well, thank you so much, Bard.
And thank you. I love you.
I love you. Thank you so much for helping me out. We're gonna go into the outro song.